Well, here's a nicely restored Royal Enfield 250 unit Clipper, or at least it looks nicely restored, doesn't it? Nice and shiny and nice paint, and it all looks almost like a new bike. But one of the things that the owner asked me to look at was oil leaking from this side, and so I've pitched in already and I've got the primary cover off to have a look, and sure enough there was no gasket there at all. You should have a paper or card gasket. It was actually doused in silicone sealant, so much so I should have kept it to show, but it's in the bin now. But I had the palm of my hand full of silicone that I scraped off here. It was all hanging like snot everywhere. So that's nice and professional, isn't it? And you can get gaskets easily enough. I've got a gasket in stock actually, when I thought I needed one for the last one of these I worked on. So I've got that to use. But more disturbingly is the size of these holes. Now, let's see, if we look at that hole there, and perhaps that hole there, keep those two in mind, all the rest are meant to be the same size as those. They're absolutely enormous. Look at that one. Someone's been drilling and or filing, I don't know why, but they've got so close to the edge of the material there that I don't know whether they're going to make a good seal even with a gasket. I'm going to try fitting a gasket, and I'll use well seal as well, but certainly not that silicone snot, and I'll see what happens. But it may be that these need attending to. Probably, if they're going to cause trouble, you can get them filled in with weld and re-drill them through from the other side, the correct size. I really don't know why anyone would want to do that, unless of course I can see that there's one or two helicoils in there. Maybe they've helicoiled and not got them quite straight, and then maybe the screws wouldn't go in, so they filed the holes out to allow the screws to go in. I don't know at this point. It's quite possible, but no doubt I'll link this video up to various other ones that I make featuring this machine along the way. I've already freed off another one which you won't be seeing, but I'll tell you about it. The throttle was sticking, I was told about that, and that's a brand new Amel type monoblock carburettor, and it's got a chrome plated slide in there, and that was binding in the bore of the carburettor body and binding on the jet block, so I had to get some very fine emery out and carefully work with that to ease up the fit of everything a little bit, so that the three components, the jet block, the slide and the carburettor body, could all interact smoothly and allow the slide to work up and down, which it now does. So I'm not far off probably trying to start this up and maybe see how it runs, but for now that's where I am, tidying up the work of some previous restorer once again. Well, I'm in on the primary side of this machine. I've got the oil filter and all its various components removed now, and I'll be changing that and doing a full oil change, of course. Oh, and there's the screws from the primary case, by the way. Look at that, coated in that rubber goo to try and stop the oil coming out, no doubt. Terrible. I just happened to pull the clutch, you know, as you do idly sometimes, and it doesn't go right back to the bars, and that's because the springs on the clutch, although quite hard whatever they are going coil bound, because someone's even gone to the trouble of putting washers behind them, so you're not getting a full movement or full lift of the clutch pressure plate on this. So I can guarantee that this machine probably suffers from some sort of clutch drag as well as possibly slip, so I'm going to have a look at that and see what I can do with it, and maybe, as I did once before on a 350 Model G, I'll convert this possibly to use 6 lighter springs if needs be, so that we can restore the travel but maintain the pressure that we want on the pressure plate. But at the moment that clutch is very hard to pull in. Those springs look almost like valve springs. I don't know what they are, but I think they're going to have to go. So it's an ideal opportunity for me to look at that as well. So I'm sure the owner will be quite happy for me to do so. So that's what I'm going to do next. Well, I wasn't planning to make another clip quite so soon, but once again, here's one of the things, you know, where you just couldn't make it up really and get your head around what some people are thinking when they're doing it. I've just taken the pressure plate off, and we had obviously these sleeves passing through the pressure plate, the washers that I said I'd seen behind the springs. Then the springs go on these obviously, and then this cap screws up tight to those. You screw the bolts up as tight as you can, and it compresses the springs and holds them in place. So those washers that were underneath the springs would add to the compression on the springs. But somebody in their wisdom, I've just put this sleeve and washer here just to demonstrate, somebody has actually fitted washers underneath the sleeves. So all that does is push the sleeves further out and the retaining cap further out. So the compression on the springs, the extra compression on the springs that you get by using these washers under them, is negated or taken away because those springs are fitted, those washers are fitted there. So they actually do no good at all. So you'd be better off with just having the one set of washers under the springs and do away with those if you want to increase the sort of preload on the springs. But all they've done is they've shifted the whole lot out without having any effect at all on the spring preload. So I'll be doing away with them, but I'm going to get the plates out as well and have a look and just make sure that everything's okay in there, because you never know what you might find further in. So that's next. Well, once again I didn't get very far before I decided I'd pick the camera up. I got the clutch plates out and they seem alright, and I was just about to start putting things back together when I sort of grabbed hold of this and checked the play, and there's quite a lot of it there. And I've removed the circlip. I took this off, and you can actually, I would imagine the camera will pick it up. You see a groove there worn into the clutch centre line, and I'll just point it out with the screwdriver. Perhaps there, the tip of the screwdriver is actually in the wear, the channel that the wear has dug out there, and that's where the ball bearings in the clutch basket have just been running on that and worn into it, and you end up with all that play, which at first might not seem too serious. And I think I've discussed this before, funnily enough, on another Unit 250 Royal Enfield engine. I think that not only will it sort of give false readings or information on primary chain tension, because you can have the primary chain feeling quite tight and then squeeze the top run of the chain, and this will move forwards, and all of a sudden you've got all sorts of slack in the chain. But on top of that, I think that when the machine's being ridden and under load, that's going to probably help induce clutch slip, because the power, the pull of the engine on the chain is going to try and pull this clutch basket towards the crankshaft all the time, and as it spins, the position that the clutch basket is in relative to the centre will keep changing, because it will keep on pulling it forwards, and as it does, it's going to initiate slip in the clutch plates. So I'm not going to necessarily say it needs to be binned, although it probably does. I'll certainly give it some thought and see if I've got any better clutch centres than that here myself, because that could be a major contributory factor to any clutch slip this machine suffered from. And judging by how hard those pressure plate springs were and the washers under them and everything else, it certainly would seem that someone's been battling with some clutch slip on this machine in the past, so I'll have a little think about this one and possibly change that, or if not, put it all back together, and if it does slip badly, then we'll know that that ought to be changed. But yeah, another little discovery on a so-called restored machine. As luck would have it, I've had a little bit of a rummage and I found that I've got a used clutch centre in what appears to be quite good condition. It was a bit rusty, I've cleaned it up a little, and I've tried the fit of this clutch basket on it, and there's probably only a couple of thou play there between the two of them, compared with what was an enormous amount of play between those two. So I'll be fitting this clutch centre instead of this one. Another reason for me changing it, I've just seen, whether the camera will pick this up, as I turn clutch centre, see that high spot? Someone may have perhaps put a screwdriver in behind it at some point in its life and tried to lever it off the taper, I don't know, but you've got that high spot, and you can also see the effect it's had on the grip against the friction material. It's actually held up the friction material on the high spot, which has made it struggle to grip elsewhere, so that would also be a major cause of clutch slip. So I'm hoping that this one, certainly when I spun the clutch basket against it, we got I picked up a few bits there with it, there we are. It all seems to be fairly flat and true, so that in itself, changing the clutch centre for that one, should make a very big difference in how the clutch works. Although I have to say, I've not actually ridden this machine myself yet to know how it was before, because of my being told about the oil leak here and the throttle slide having been sticking. So I'm not going to have anything to go on to tell me what it was like before, but I'm sure that everything I do here should improve the clutch to some degree, big or small, and hopefully it won't be too long before we find out. There we are, I've got the clutch and primary drive all back together on the Royal Enfield Clipper 250. There's the old heavily worn, heavily grooved clutch centre there. It was also a bit distorted, and the one that I wanted to use as a replacement is in there fitted. I've got a good range of clutch lever movement now, all the way back to the handlebars, a little bit of free play, good lift on the clutch pressure plate, the springs aren't going coil bound, so I'm happy with all that, and the tension on the primary chain is much less random now, and when I pull on it like that, the clutch basket doesn't creep forwards on the centre as it did on the other one, so I think we're going to be far less prone to clutch slip. So I've still got to fit a new oil filter to it and a gasket on here, and put the outer cover back on and see if that'll hold oil when I've done all that, and then I think we might be ready to have a test ride on it. So I'm going to wrap this all up now and call this part 1 of this Royal Enfield Clipper 250 story, and we'll pick up when there's more developments and things to discuss.